All right, so
Okay,
we're back. We're back with another podcast here. Atomic Habits is the book we're going to be going over, and this book is
different
just
day.
this is a powerful one. This is a powerful one. Yeah, this is one of the most powerful books as a poker player I think you can read. One of the top five most powerful books. Any poker player I think should pick this book up. Even if you're not a poker, I mean you should be reading this book regardless. But being a poker player, it's just becomes that much more of a read. Um, so yeah, let's just get straight into it,
Get
Mr.
straight
Scotty.
into it.
Let's get
Right, here we are back.
straight to the meat.
Good to see Good to see you again. Haven't seen you since we recorded the last podcast, which definitely wasn't
Yes.
today because you're wearing a tank top. I've got a
No,
different
I'm in Mexico
t-shirt.
now. Playa del Carmen. See,
Ah,
Playa.
muy bien.
I'm in Mexico
Yeah.
now.
See,
All right.
this is definitely a new day. We're not
Yes.
doing these back to back and just
No.
trying to hoodwink people. That's not, and it's definitely not our second attempt at recording this. That's definitely no.
No. That's
No,
not either. Nope.
we definitely didn't do a 45-minute podcast on precisely this that we're having to redo. That didn't happen. Speaking of which, Atomic Habits, book notes, 9.5 out of 10,
Mm-hmm.
which is very high on the Jack Stack scale. So there are only a couple of books that ever achieved a 10. I think Power of Now, if I remember correctly, Eckhart Tolle.
And you were for sure.
There might have been maybe The One Thing might have got a 10. I think.
New Earth definitely got a 10. The Untethered
Yeah.
Soul definitely got a 10. If we ever, I'm pretty sure we did a podcast on that.
We did do
Yeah.
the Untethered Soul.
Yeah.
Yes.
There was a few that got 10s.
So this is pretty high. This is one of my favorite books. Yeah, I have like my default favorite. I think probably two books. I think the two books that I've ever listened to the audiobook and then genuinely felt like my life went in a different direction since I read them. And I read them both in 2017/2018. So those two books were, and I'm always on about this book, which was The Obstacle is the Way, which was my first introduction to Stoicism, which had a pretty big impact on my life. The second one was Atomic Habits. So I'm glad we finally got around to this one. I read this book and realized what a disorganized, useless, habitless piece of shit that I really was back in those days. Now, for those of you watching, you probably still look at me as a disorganized piece of shit. You'd be right to an extent. I am. Reading this book did not make me an organized person, but it certainly did make me more habitual and more aware of habits. So, Jack, you'll remember my grind consistency was all over the place. Like I used to work nights and then I would switch and work days, and I didn't have a start time. I didn't have an end time. I didn't have like set study times. My life was just chaotic, and
Right.
it felt like the worst thing about it was that it felt like I worked all the time, and yet my hours were always coming out lower than I wanted them to be. It's really strange how that works. When you don't have habits, when you don't have like a routine, it feels like you're always busy because your on time and your off time is so interspersed with one another that you never really feel like you're doing one or the other. So for me, it felt like I was constantly at work. It felt like I never had days off. It felt like I was working like 15-hour days, but in reality, like my productivity was super low because things like getting ready for work and having dinner would take like 2.5 hours because I was doing everything so slowly and procrastinating, when in reality, it was something that could have been done within, say, 30 minutes. So I realized that I needed structure, and this book was the one that really hammered that home. And now, even though and you know this, Jack, I by nature a very disorganized person and always have been. Finally, my life follows like a more something resembling a schedule. I work pretty much the same hours every single day, which is really useful for me. So, yeah, Jack, where's the missing 0.5 there?
The missing point five is just because at the time I read this book, I already personally felt like I have very strong habits. So it didn't help me that much because I already had these like rock solid habits in place. But just the quality of the things in the book, I couldn't give it anything lower than 9.5. Even though like
Yeah,
it's just like, even if you have strong habits, when I give it a 9.5, I mean even if you have strong habits, you should read the book. That's
Yeah.
just what I'm getting at. If my habits were kind of lacking, I would give it a 10. instantly because it just deserves to have a 10. But I'm just like especially these days, like I used to be the same like you, where I was very chaotic. Like I said, I woke up different times in the day. I would play. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no set time for meditation. I had no set time for anything. But these days, like my routine is extremely habitual and extremely structured. Like I wake up, I have my same routine. I do either the coaching. If I don't have the coaching, I'll do a workout. Then I'll do 10 minutes of stretching. I'll do 20 minutes of meditation. I'll take a shower. I'll eat. Like everything is extremely structured. Like I'll eat at the same time every single day, 2 p.m. And like everything is very routine and structured for me throughout my day. And I just feel better having it that way and my habits in place. And do I have days where I have like a smaller amount of things to do as my routine? Yes. On weekends like Saturday, Sunday, like I'll just have like 10 minutes stretching, 20 minutes meditation. Shower, but then I still eat at the same time, and then like for the rest of my day, it's a little bit less structured, but it's pretty damn structured. Let's just put it that way. It's pretty damn structured. So this book is how to do that if you don't have any structure in your life, or if you want a little bit of structure, or if you want a lot of structure. That's up to you. I recommend starting very small for anybody watching, just starting very small, but let's just get into like some of the points. Let's do 2 at a time. We'll do 2
at a time. So first things we'll say is just for anyone watching this, if you are someone who's unstructured, you should definitely read this book. If you're someone who thinks that they're pretty structured, you should also read this book. This is pretty much like everybody should just read this book. I think this book maybe came topped the New York Times bestsellers list.
Probably. I don't know.
And it's like, I think it's like one of, or the only ever self-development book that's ever done that. This is like critically acclaimed. This is a very like high-profile, globally renowned book. This guy really smashed it. Perfect blend, in my opinion, of facts/science and anecdotes as well. So it's not an overload of information that it becomes boring and hard to read, but it's not overly anecdotal to the point where you don't actually believe what's being said. It really is like an excellent blend. Super book. So let's do 2 points at a time. So point A, identity level change is what you want. Telling yourself I'm not a morning person or I'm not good with technology are just stories that you've been telling yourself for years. And once you say these things about yourself, your brain tries to stay congruent with these beliefs. Point B, the habits of your closest friends and people you spend the most time with rub off on you without you even being aware sometimes. So looking at point A there, identity level change, the whole I'm not a morning person thing, I'm not good with technology. Ultimately, I mean, to put this in the most simplest forms possible, it's just excuses, right? If we're being honest.
I mean, you tell yourself a story. But no, I wouldn't say it's excuse. I would say it's just false beliefs. Like, I mean,
how do you distinguish, just quickly? What's the difference to you between a false belief and an excuse?
There could not be a difference, but let's say, for example, like, a false belief is like something that you actually believe to be true. An excuse is like something that like it's not true. You're making an excuse for like take a shortcut or whatever. Like a false belief is like you're actually very convinced of this. Like you don't think it's an excuse. You're very convinced that it's not an excuse. When you make excuses, sometimes you can kind of catch yourself. You're like, you know what? I feel like I'm kind of. That's a
good and important distinction, I think. Because people will say, "Oh, these are just excuses," but you're right. Like an excuse is something that you know to be untrue.
Sometimes you know it. Sometimes you may not know it, but the people around you might know it. I would say because sometimes you're making an excuse and you don't realize it's an excuse, but like the people around you are like, this guy's full of shit. He's making excuses. But this one is like it's a little bit deeper. I think a false belief it's a little bit more deeper engraved into you where it becomes part of your identity, right? You're just like this is who I am. I'm just not a morning person, and you're 1,000% convinced of it. Every cell in your body is convinced of it until you gradually convince yourself, or like you take the actions of like, wait a second, maybe I'm somewhat okay in the mornings. And something has caused me to believe that I'm not. Like my example is a good one. because I, told myself I'm not a morning person for, as many years as I can imagine.
Yeah.
And like, but the thing is, like, it's like if for example, let's say I wake up at like 9 a.m. every day, which I did for actually like a year and a half or something. Wake up at 9 a.m. every day, which is like kind of the morning, It's not like mega morning, but it's kind of the morning. In the past, I felt like I couldn't do this and be somewhat happy with it. But I did it. That's just what happened. I actually did it, and I was completely fine with it after a while. The first few weeks, I was miserable. But so what happened is now, what I realize now is that the reason why I hated waking up in the morning so much, I've only realized this like now, and like the last, like since we did that first podcast actually. The reason why I didn't like waking up in the morning, I had this like every time I woke up in the morning, I was like, I had this feeling, is because when I was younger, a lot of times when I woke up in the morning, I was woken up by my mom's like screeching, voice. Telling me to get up, you have to go to school, and like, so I built this negative association. Like I built this story or this false belief in my mind that waking up in the morning is associated with pain and like it's miserable. These are the beliefs I had. Waking up in the morning equals misery, pain, being tired throughout the day, feeling like shit all the time. So I had all these beliefs that waking up in the morning causes this. And the truth is, like, waking up in the morning doesn't really cause that. It's just like a lack of sleep can cause some of those. But waking up in the morning in itself doesn't necessarily cause that if you get enough sleep. But the thing is, like, you come like full circle, because now you realize in your life, you're like, wait, when I wake up at 9 now, I don't wake up at 9 now, but like I wake up at 10:15 now. When I wake up at 10:15 now, I can wake up at 10:15 because I know now, like, I don't have to associate that with pain. I can associate that with positivity and productivity. So when I wake up, I'm not that like, like shit, like I have to get out of bed, like fuck, like that feeling when you wake up in the morning and you're just like, God, I do not want to get out of bed. This is terrible. This is terrible. You have that. Everyone can kind of relate to that to some extent, I would say. When you wake up and you're like, I didn't get enough sleep. I do not want to wake up right now. Fuck me, like it's not fun. But the thing is, like, once you do that for like over the course of a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months, and you train yourself to go to bed earlier. Notice I said train yourself. You train yourself to go to bed earlier and wake up earlier. Eventually, what happens is your body just gets used to it, right? Like, what's the difference, for example, between sleeping at 4 a.m. and let's say waking up at 2 p.m. That's 10 hours of sleep, right? You sleep at 4 a.m., you wake up at 2 p.m. And you have to gradually do this because of circadian rhythms and shit. But now if you sleep at let's say you sleep at 10 p.m. and then you wake up at 8 a.m., same 10 hours, you're still getting 10 hours of sleep. So the only difference is your circadian rhythms have to be trained to get adjusted to those times, which takes a while, but all I'm saying is that it's very possible if you actually really wanted to do it, and it's possible in that you can actually feel good doing it too. It's just going to take a little bit of time. Like, am I saying you're going to switch from, like, let's say, for example, someone watching this wakes up at 2 p.m. and he wants to wake up at 8. All of a sudden tomorrow you're just going to start waking up at 8 and feel good. It's not going to happen. You're going to feel like shit. Your circadian rhythm is going to be thrown off. Your brain is going to go, you're going to be fuzzy. But if you start training yourself to go to sleep at an earlier time every single day and wake up at an earlier time every single day, over the matter of weeks and months, it might take months to get your circadian rhythms kind of, flowing back, but it's trainable, just like everything, like we talked about in the placebo podcast. You have to train yourself to do that. You can't snap your fingers and do it, right? It's like training. It's like, for example, if you tell a newbie poker player, Scott, one of your new friends, you're just like, he's like, I want to get really good at poker. You tell him, listen, in the simplest forms, you cannot do that overnight. You have to train your brain over time to get good at poker. But yes, it's possible. So somebody's like, I'm not a morning person. Yes, you're not a morning person now, just like you weren't a good poker player 5 years ago. But you can train yourself to be a morning person. If it's important to you and you really want to do it, you can. That's the point, right? It's trainable.
it's a serious question of just belief systems
And how bad do you want it to? If you don't want it that bad,
Yeah.
it's not gonna like. Let's say you're a newbie poker player. You're like, I kind of want to get good at poker, but not like whatever. You're probably not gonna do what it takes to train your brain to get to that point where you're excellent at poker, right? Same thing
Yeah.
if you're like if you have a lot of worries, like we talked about this in the placebo podcast. If you have a lot of worries and like your brain is trained to like worry about all the negatives and stuff. If you don't really, 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 really want to change that over to the positive, you're probably not going to. That's just the
Yeah.
fact. Like if you're training your brain to do something, it has to be something that's very important to you and something that you really deep down inside want to do, and then anything is possible from there.
Yeah, this is one of those situations where you need to have a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset. You need to be open to it. You need to be willing to believe that you can change.
It's not.
You need to be willing.
I'm not saying it's gonna be easy either. It's not gonna be easy, and it's not gonna be fast. But everything is trainable. You can train yourself to do it. Just like yeah. I mean, you would have never thought 5 years ago that, but you wanted it so bad. That's how you train your mind to be such a good poker player, because you wanted it so bad. You're just like, I really want this. It's very important to me. You dedicated a lot of your time to it. It was hard. It was rough, but you did it, right?
Yeah.
So same thing with
waking
up in the mornings. Let's say, for example, if you really wanted to, and for whatever reason, it was extremely important to you to get to a point where you're going to bed at like 10 and you're waking up at 7 in the morning, you would eventually get to a point where you're happily doing that. It would just happen. Even you can tell yourself you're not a morning person or whatever. If you really wanted to train your brain to be a morning person, you can. It's just laziness. You don't want to, or it's just not that important to you, right? That's what we got to kind of face. If it's not that important to you, you're probably not going to do it. But anything is trainable.
Yeah. And probably appropriate at this point to talk about the formation of a habit and the time that it takes. There is conflicting information that there's no concrete evidence on the amount of time required to form a new habit.
Sure.
But the generally accepted, and I think the one that's in the book, but I know the generally accepted rule is around 60 days. It's 60 days of performing a new activity in a certain time frame before it becomes habitual.
But then, it's also like a forever thing, because you still have to consciously do it. Otherwise, it's easy to let go of these habits as well, too, even after 60 days, right? You do it for 60 days. It's like let's say, for example, you go to the gym every day for 60 days, and then you stop for a couple days. The habit kind of dies. It's really a forever thing from my perspective.
It's more that after 60 days, it becomes your normal.
Easier. It becomes easier. But you still have to consciously do it. So it's really a forever thing, forever for as long as you want to keep the habit, kind of thing.
I'm gonna throw linguistics in the mix here, and again dip back into the last podcast. Self-talk is something that's come up on a few of these podcasts before. Jack is a big proponent of positive self-talk and avoiding negative self-talk, which a lot of us are guilty of. Like if you're running bad, for example, sometimes when I run bad, I'll be like, I'll say out loud, yeah, you knew he had that wobble. Why did you do that? And then I'm like, no, this is not helpful, and that's going to make things worse. In terms of forming the new habit, and Jack, I know that this was on a podcast maybe 2 years ago.
But just on that, you could say the same thing, the same words, but with a positive twist. Like, for example, I tell myself, let's say you make a bad call, you're like, Scott, you should have known he had a hand. That's all right. You'll do better next time. And you give yourself a positive twist on it. If it starts with a negative, just end it with a positive. And when you're aware of it, because sometimes you'll have that negative self-talk and you're not really aware that it's happening. In those cases, you can't catch it. But when you become aware, you're like, oh, wait a second, I actually had this negative bullshit belief or negative self-talk. In that moment, you're like, you consciously, this is where the training happens, by the way. You consciously switch it to a positive. And then every time you catch yourself, you switch it to a positive. Every time you catch yourself, you switch to a positive. Is it a lot of work? Yeah. But throughout the day, you're going to have lots of negative thoughts. When you do catch it, you switch it to a positive. And then eventually, what you're doing there is you're training your brain. You're putting the reps in. And eventually, it'll start to happen a little bit more automatically over the months, over the years.
It's like a redirect, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like a redirect, and it's not
Yeah.
about really eliminating the negatives. It's about twisting it a little bit. You know,
Yeah.
it's like giving it a little twist.
Yeah, in terms of the linguistics, for those of you who are trying to, it's funny that I say trying, given what I'm about to say. For those of you who are trying, attempting, or planning to form a new habit, don't say that, for example, when you lay out your habit, let's say that you write your habit down, okay? You say, I'll try to go to the gym every day at 2 p.m. This is one thing that Jack taught me a long time ago in a podcast is do not say, I will try to go to the gym at 2 p.m. because you are leaving the door open there for failure. You don't say, I'll try to go to the gym. You say, I'll go to the gym every day at 2 p.m. You don't say, I sometimes do this, or I like to do this, or I want to do this. You say, I do this.
I will do this. Yeah, like I will, or
Yeah.
I actually do. And yes, yeah, all that self-talk is just so, it's so powerful, man.
Yeah.
It's so powerful. And the thing is, like, I don't want people to think like this is not a thing where you're kind of lying to yourself, because you're not. Because, for example, let's say your brain is like, oh man, you just went through like a huge EV downswing. Yes, that's the truth. You shouldn't avoid the truth. Yes,
Yeah.
I went through this huge EV downswing, but it's okay. That's it. That's
Yeah.
the only twist you need. But it's okay. You know, we'll break through it eventually. That's it. Just something simple like that. But it's okay. As long as it's not viewed as like this terrible thing. As long as it's not viewed as a terrible thing. Even if it's neutral, it's fine. Neutral or positive,
Yeah.
it's fine. As long as you end on like a neutral or positive. Because, you know, when you're going through a downswing, it's not like you want to trick your brain like, no, the downswing never happened. I'm only going to think positive things. That's not what you want to do at all.
Yes.
You want to accept the facts. Yes, you have bad hips, but it's not the end of the world. You know what I mean? Like, that's how you end the sentence. But it's not the end of the world, you know?